Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habīb. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who are not sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, Brahman, Great Spirit, higher power, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true selves, to our source, to the light that each of us carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introduction of our conversation partners for this episode, Dr. Seth Schoen and Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. Dr. Seth Schoen is co-director of the Lilly Pathways Grant for Revitalizing Theological Education at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. His research and teaching interests are in contemplative and spiritual practices, especially the cultivation of compassion. Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter's research, training, and activist interests are in Black, womanist, and environmental ethics, with a particular focus on race, food, and non-human animals. Currently, he is an associate professor of theology, ecology, and race at Methodist Theological School in Ohio, the lead pastor of the Loft at Westwood United Methodist Church, and the co-creator of Racial Resilience with Dr. Seth Schoen, an anti-racism and anti-oppression training program. Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is married to Dr. Gabriel Carter, a small animal veterinary oncologist. And while their son Isaiah is not a doctor of any sort, he definitely believes he is smarter than his parents. Dr. Shane and Reverend Dr. Carter, as I mentioned, are the co-creators of Racial Resilience. It's a pleasure to have you both here. I will say that to learn more about their work, please visit racialresilience.com. So, Reverend Shane and Reverend Dr. Carter, thank you for being here. Welcome. Would you please start us off by telling a little bit about your spiritual story as a way of introducing yourself? And I understand that, Seth, you'd like to go first.
Yeah. So my spiritual story. Okay. So I grew up Methodist, and my extended family was Methodist, and that was a really warm part of my childhood. But I ran into trouble in late junior high school. I played the saxophone, and I wanted to be a musician. And some of my friends at school were starting a band and asked me if I wanted to join. And so I said, yes, I would like to join because I want to play music. And this was a way for me to gig in high school. It was super cool. But they were conservative, evangelical Christians, and we were in a ska band. They were putting a ska band together. So that puts me in a really tight window of my high school years. Late 90s. And I had fun doing that, and I was deeply wounded by it, but I didn't understand the deeply wounded part at the time. I just knew that playing the ska band was fun. I wanted to be a musician and play gigs. And then one summer we were the band at their church camp, and they start with like kindergarten age groups, and each week go through a different age up through high school. And the theme for the camp was accepting Jesus Christ as your personal savior as soon as possible because you don't know when you're going to die. Right. And so that felt wrong to me when we were the band at the end of the week playing for early elementary school kids. I was like, these kids don't understand all of this, or it just didn't feel right. And I didn't have the language to explain it at the time because I was in high school and I just wanted to play music. And so I kind of justified that by saying like, well, I'm not singing, I'm playing music. So I'm not fully contributing to what's happening here. And so that was like the cognitive gymnastics I was doing to justify why it was okay. And then, flash forward 20 20, almost 30 years. And that's when I started reading more about trauma in the work that I do with Christopher,
Mhm.
and then began reflecting on, past experiences in my life. And that's when I began to name what happened to me as trauma, where I was around particularly moral injury because I was perpetuating something that was against my own moral compass. And so once I was able to put that together, this feeling I had since high school of like, I hated that time. It was a
Mhm.
terrible time for me. Um, and then I'd push it away and then it would come back periodically. And until I started reading about trauma, I couldn't put together that this was because of what I was doing there. I was preaching a message that I didn't believe in and that I thought was wrong, morally and spiritually wrong. Like I took part in committing moral and spiritual violence against children. And until I could name that for myself, I wasn't able to really begin healing around that. And that was hard. So there was a lot I learned in the interim period to be able to handle all of the stuff that came up.
Mhm.
And so I guess back to high school, then I dropped out of college. I started college as a musician, dropped out of college, went into AmeriCorps, and had some experiences there that really kind of woke me up to a larger world, woke me up to justice issues. And our first project, we were at an inner city school in Baltimore, and I was just helping out in the classroom with second graders. And we were all lining up to go out to recess. This was kind of my wake up moment. We're
Mhm.
all lining up to go out to recess. Kids at this age instantly love you by default, almost. Like you show them any kind of like interest and kindness, and they take right to you. And so, I mean, I'm a nice guy, and so uh, they were taken right to me, and I was like, "Well, this is super cool. Like I got to be a rock star when I go to work." So I like that. But we're lining up to go out to recess, and one of the kids looks up at me, and he's like he's really thinking about something, and he says, "Mr. Shane, are you white?" And he goes, and then another kid comes in before I had a chance to respond. And he says, "No, no, 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 no. He ain't white. He's light skinned." And then time to go out to recess. And then we went. I didn't have a time to respond or think about it. And I was like, whoa, what just happened there? I can't make sense of that. Like, obviously, I'm as white as you get. Like, there's no light skinnedness about me. And so once I got into race, I could think, like, put all this together and talking with Chris about it, came to realize, like, this second grader had a deep awareness about the way race works in this country, far beyond what I had as an adult, because he understood that there's something off about white people. They're not always safe to be around. Like the kid that
Mm.
jumped in and was trying to protect me, um,
Yeah.
understood that, like, there's something about white people that's not safe to be around. And Mr. Shane, I like him, so he can't be white because white people aren't safe.
Mm.
And so light skin is the way he made sense of that. That I'm still like, no, no, he's still black. He's safe. He's one of us.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to make sense of that experience. It was for a lot of my life, it was just a funny experience. And then when I got into race, I began to understand more the depth of what was actually going on there.
Mhm.
Um, and that's become a really foundational story in my racial awareness, of knowing how race functions, how people are hurt by it, and positioning myself within that. Um, and that sort of lay dormant until I got to graduate school, and I met Chris. We started seminary at the same time, and our second semester, we knew each other before that, but we weren't really friends before that, but we were colleagues, I guess you might say. Um, and then we both sat at the front of the class, New Testament Studies 101, and we both have ADHD. And so we wanted to, sit at the front, pay attention, filter out distractions. Great idea in principle, but we sat next to each other and ended up becoming a distraction for each other more than anything else. Uh, we did well. We both did well in New Testament studies. But that started a long friendship. And and again, not understanding at the time what's happening. I was just being me, listening to Chris. And he has a very different explanation that I'm sure he's going to offer here in a minute about his experience of that. But I was just listening because Chris was talking about race and kind of his experiences with that. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to listen here, because he's talking about something serious.
Yeah.
And just being present and trying to make sense of that, because it was so much of it was outside of my own life experience,
Hmm.
and another opening to like, wow, people in the United States have very different life experiences. I grew up in the Midwest. It was, very white. And the kind of life experiences Chris was sharing were just outside of my own entirely, sometimes. And then there was a lot of overlap and similarity as well. Um, and I got into spirituality proper, um, as an area of study and as a really deep interest in becoming more committed to it, more critical about it, um, when I switched majors in graduate school. So I started as out in New Testament studies because I really enjoy um, history and learning how people think. And so this was an opportunity to begin to learn how ancient people thought as best as you can get at that.
Mm.
And I thought that was the way to deepen my sense of who I am as a Christian.
Mm.
Um, and I found out pretty quickly it wasn't, but it took me 2 years to admit that to myself. And so I went
Mhm.
through most of a master's degree hating graduate school
Mhm.
and thinking like this is how it's supposed to be. Um, and then it was my last semester there. I had one elective left, and I was like, you know what? However I'm picking classes is not working. Like I pick a class I think I would like, and then I get in it, and I hate it. I don't like it. This is not for me. I'm not interested in it. And so I said, okay. So what I think I like is not working. So I'm going to look through the class roster and pick a class I would never choose to take. So, what class would I never choose to take? Okay, spiritual formation for the contemplative way. Yeah, that's a class that I would hate. So, I'm going to take that class. And then Chris was looking for an easy A, and so he decided to take it with me. And so we took that class together. And each class began with a meditation, and then it went into lecture, and it was joint taught by the professors that would end up being my main mentors and on my dissertation committee. But at the time, the meditation, okay, that was pretty cool. Second class, we get there, have a meditation, and then I'm like, oh man, I feel a little bit better. And so at the time, I was dating my now wife, and we were kind of we were bottoming out because I was a good graduate student. So that means I understood how to construct an argument, I understood how to break down an argument. I didn't understand how to turn those things off. And so when we would talk, she would tell me about her day, and I would say, well, I'd start picking it apart and telling her where she went wrong, and
God.
building intimacy through really, kind of attacking her. So we were in a rough spot, not in a good place. So then after the second class, I call her and say, I don't know what it is about this class, but I feel like I don't know, I feel a little lighter. I don't know what it is. And she said, yeah, I know what you mean. I feel like I have you back again. And for me, that was like Paul in
Mm.
Damascus, on the road to Damascus, scales falling from his face, like new life in me. I really felt like, okay, I don't know what this is. I don't know where it's going, but I need to pursue it. Because
Yeah.
after two meditations, my girl, my fiance, is feeling different about our relationship. Like I honestly don't know that we would have survived graduate school if I had not taken that class. I think our relationship may have fallen apart. We were pretty close. And so
Yeah.
to me, spirituality is life. That's
Mm.
what spirituality brings. I think it's a fundamental part of what it means to be human. Um, I think it goes beyond what it means to be human. I think there are animals that demonstrate some of the same capacities as humans for
Mm.
spirituality. Um, but I haven't pursued that in depth. So I can't go deeply there. I think Christopher could do a better job than I can. Um, and spirituality brought my life back to me and has helped
Mm,
me to flourish. And every time I am in touch with those parts of myself that I feel most connected to my sense of spirituality, and to how I understand God, is when I make the best decisions in my life. Not the easiest. They're not always easy decisions, but they're the best decisions. That's when I'm
yeah.
living into myself most fully.
Yeah.
No, I think Seth's story, as he said, our stories overlap in so many ways. Um, and I'll put back the curtain for the production meeting. I wanted Seth to go first because I knew his story would be a little bit longer than mine, but also just more funny and interesting because there's all these ups and downs. And I grew up in a black church that was eventually ended up being in a black Methodist church. It was a traditional black church. Like I had great church experience. Like I loved going to church. Like great music, good preaching, you know, like I didn't have any kind of I went to church that was about as inclusive of LGBTQ people as you could be. Like basically it was like don't ask, don't tell. Like no one just we knew, but no one just talked didn't but it's the 90s, you know. So I was like, that's pretty progressive for the Midwest. Um and I didn't have any kind of real negative experiences with church per se. It wasn't great, obviously, patriarchy and all that other kind of stuff. But broadly speaking, I loved church. I felt a call to ministry. And it really was about this commitment to understanding. Um, I really love what Thurman called the religion of Jesus. And it always confused me why people could be in church on Sunday and read and say these things and then get out in the week and do something totally different. Like I just
Mm,
didn't understand that. It didn't connect with me. I always understood why people do what they do. And I felt this call to be among the people to help translate, to help people to translate like the sacred text and this way of Jesus to others in a way that could move us towards love and justice and not what I would say is compassion. So when I go to seminary, I'm very committed to being in some kind of ministry. I wasn't sure if it'd be church ministry or not. I have not the best internship at a pretty big church. It was predominantly white and Filipino. I was the only black person there, and that was done intentionally because I wanted to be in a multiracial context. That didn't end well. It ended fine. It wasn't like terrible, but I have a very charismatic personality, and so that caused some challenges between me and the senior pastor. Ultimately, it led me to become the senior pastor of the church that Seth actually attended in Compton, California.
mm,
I was 29 years old, and I became the senior pastor of this church where, the average age is probably 55. Uh, Lots of people in there, like between, I would say 50 to 90, black people and Tongan Asian Pacific Islander. And at this point, I'm in a PhD program. I'm sure I'm going to teach religion, but I'm not sure I'm going to work in a church anymore because I honestly have fallen out of love with church. I still love
mm,
God. I loved God, but I was not in love with church. And for me, being in Compton helped me fall back in love with church. It helped me realize the vitalization of what true spirituality is and how these things aren't disconnected. And I was fortunate enough to be able to bring Seth there, and I know this was part of his healing experience because honestly, Seth, this was when we first started. That's when I first started learning about your ska band experiences. Seth
Hmm.
played saxophone at our church in Compton, right? So you got this black church with Seth, as again, white, not light skinned, actually white, right? It's like with him and his wife. And so there's like two, three, four white people start coming in, and my wife is white. And you start, and it was over the course of 2 years, you start seeing this church take shape and grow. And some of that is because, like, when I started there, I remember Dr. Jones, one of the members there, told me, he said, I have shoes older than you. And and because and he wasn't lying. Like he had shoes older than me. But they needed someone who was like invested in them, who would love them. And I needed someone to actually love me. And I didn't know that we needed each other. Like I
Mm.
had no, it was, and they told, like, I had been there for a year, and someone basically articulated that, like you came to Compton at a time when we needed you, but you also needed us. And it was that nourishment. It was like being in a community of grandparents that genuinely love you and that got on fire for service and love and nurturing. And they nurtured me, they nurtured Seth, they nurtured our wives, and it started to transform a community. Like it was amazing. And I would say my spiritual life, like I don't know that I'll ever be in a place where I feel as connected to community and to God in community than I had when I was a pastor at this small black church in the hood in Compton, California. And it was profoundly has shaped what I think ministry ought be. Like I know when it feels right to be in a space where your theology and your spirituality and your practice are in alignment. And so I know what that feels like. So it's like constantly seeking it. And I think the way we were able to create a burgeoning interracial, justice oriented, church of older black people with with some white folks around there, that was a testament to the way the sacred works within and through us. And so that's informed so much of the work that Seth and I do.
Wonderful. I can't help but notice the connections between our stories in that I still teach as a guest in that contemplative practices class that is offered that Seth brought up that yeah, Dr. Frank Rogers
Mhm.
always asked me uh, to guest at once a semester in that class to lead a contemplative practice. And I can't help but think because we all went to Claremont School of Theology,
Mhm.
my experience, just not to get into my whole story, but just to point out sort of how the divine works in mysterious ways and wonderful ways was I had been suffering um, I had some chronic health challenges that were really, it was a real low point in my life as far as health wise. I had multiple doctors saying, basically, buddy, you're on the way out. So, and so that had been very motivational for me spiritually. So I did things that I had not done, like I did a 40-day retreat. I went on the pilgrimage and was basically after doing these things that I had previously sort of stopped myself from doing, I went ahead and did them because it was kind of like, okay, if I'm going out, I'm going to go out with a bang, right? I want to be as ready as I can be spiritually. Um, and so then at the end, I was like, well, I'm still here. Like I'm still I'm still twitching.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's next? And so in my tradition, there's a specific process that you do when you're asking for guidance about like big life questions. What's that's called istikara. And you say a particular prayer. You do a couple rounds of the traditional Islamic prayer. The rakats are called. So anyway, you do this process. And so I did that right before going to bed. And I went to bed, had a dream. And in the dream, it could not have been more specific. I went to school, I got a PhD. Even the topic of the dissertation was in the dream.
Hmm.
Wow, man, I could use some clarity like that when I was in mine and just be like, hey, right on this. That saved me some stress.
And so then, like trying to figure out where to go, and then I came across Bayan Islamic Graduate School.
Mhm.
And so I went there, and the president of Bayan, Jihad Turk, met me and like reserved his afternoon and to take me
Mhm.
around campus. And so while he's taking me around campus and introducing me and showing me like pamphlets for the different programs or whatever, I look down and I see a description of Andrew Dreitzer and his research interests.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm like, that's the topic of my dissertation. And I forgot to say that when I met Jihad and we were talking, he related that he had met the sheikh that I came to Sufism through when he was 18 years old.
Wow.
And he remembered meeting the sheikh at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and this sheikh giving him a blessing. And I was like, okay, I guess this is where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
Right. There wasn't a lot of question. There's not a lot that's up for debate at that point.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, here I am. So anyway, that's how I came to be at Claremont School of Theology, taking the class and that you're talking about
That's funny.
as part of your story. And
There should be some kind of anthropological like paper on it, like because that class, I
Yeah.
mean, saved my marriage like later, but much
Yeah.
much later. But like
Mhm.
learning the practices and whatnot, that saved my marriage. It saved Seth's marriage. I mean, I don't know it maybe but it brought you there for whatever reason. So I think it speaks to the power of those kinds of courses that really allow us to do an integrative process, right? Of really to
Yeah.
bring our whole selves, our academic selves, and our spiritual selves to a space. Because there aren't a lot of those spaces in graduate school, where
Right.
you really can I mean, I'm serious with the academic stuff. Like you're reading, literature that is challenging, but you're also integrating it into your practice. And that's powerful. That's so powerful in terms of allowing us to connect with our deepest sense, or I guess as Thurman would say, the sound of the genuine within us.
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So I'm especially interested in what that looks like for y'all. I'm going to say y'all. I grew up in Texas, so
That's fine. Go right
despite my
ahead.
Y'all,
despite
works
my
for us, man.
German Jewish last name and my Arab Muslim first name, I'm gonna say y'all because I grew up in Magnolia, Texas. So okay, so I'm especially interested in how that looks for you today in this integration of spirituality, this integration of contemplation with social justice, with racial justice, with just every environmental justice. Like, how does that, what does that look like for you in you've had several years, so you've had some practice,
Yeah.
you've had some movement since these moments of awakening that you talked about. So, who wants to take that?
I mean, I'll go first, and I think for me, it's how it's sustainability. For me, it is the only way I could continue to pursue the work that I feel that I'm called to do, is through this integrative process. I think as Seth mentioned, we both have ADHD. I think we both are um, intersectional thinkers. That's just how we kind of make sense of the world. We like to tie multiple ideas together. And to do that requires a lot of energy, mental energy. And I think it can easily burn people out. I mean, it's easy to get burnt out doing racial justice work, especially because for the most part, you're asking people to do something they don't want to do. If you're talking to white people, right? I mean, to be honest with you, like most white folks, whiteness gives you the option to not see what is there, to deny the reality because it doesn't fit your own experience. And what we are inviting you to do is to actually view the world as it is. Um, and that's disrupts. It's disruptive. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting work in some ways. And for people of color, we're inviting them to go on to heal, um, and it's a healing that we all want and long for, but it's a healing that comes with perhaps this perceived sense of reticence because you're like, well, if I do this and I let my guard down, what's going to happen to me? Right? Are they going to take advantage of me? And the the way that Seth and I, for me, have been able to do our work with racial justice and the work I do in the church I'm at right now, it has to be, first of all, to be grounded in the truth of who I am. So doing what the compassion practice that we learned from Frank and Andy, to tend to ourselves so that I can be compassionate towards these other folks and whatever forms of resistance that they have, so I can invite them towards love, you know? And I think that because that invitation is genuine, because I genuinely do love them, I think it allows people to be a little bit more receptive to do something that they otherwise may not do. Um, and I think personally, it reminds me of the importance of taking as best as I can, taking care of myself. And that's hard. I mean, I'm not going to sit here on your podcast and pretend like I'm super great at self-care. That's not the case. But yeah, I would be much worse without the practice. You know what I'm saying? Like I say that right now. Like I'd be much worse. Um, and I think that for me, spirituality and spiritual practices is kind of like the universal language that people can that we speak because there's something in all of us that I think longs for that kind of connection to something that we know to be real and true. And if you can get people to tap into that and to name it, um, I think people are excited by it. And I think this is in our current social and political moment, people want to believe that there's a way for us to overcome the divisiveness that we're experiencing. And so I think that's where um, I see the spirit most at work right now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think for me, what keeps some strange things that would keep me going, I'm realizing right now. So growing up in the Midwest, hard work is not something to run from, right?
Yeah.
And then once you start a job, you finish the job. And so those things are were foundational to me in a lot of ways. Um, and then I got into so my the work now is anti-racism. Okay, well, so that's hard work, but so we don't turn away from that because we do hard work. And then I need to finish the job, and then well, this job never really ends, right? Transforming a racist society is a lifelong effort. Okay, so I need a different set of tools to help me through this, because this isn't the job. This is the job I'm going to be doing for life. And so I needed to run a marathon and not a sprint. And that's when we realized the compassion practice was really important in helping us sustain this work. Because I definitely hit a point where I was ready to burn out and walk away. And then it became a situation of, okay, well, I could burn out and walk away, but then I know what I'm leaving. I know what I'm walking back into, and choosing to willfully turn towards ignorance was not an acceptable decision for me. I couldn't do that. I couldn't turn my back on Chris and my church family in Compton, and so that's not an option. But then, to keep going, I didn't know how to go forward and keep doing things the way I was doing them because I was going to burn out. And so compassion became the way to do this. That I'm not called. So a lot of white people getting into this think that like our role, if we go into this, is to be the punching bag and to always be made fun of and that kind of thing. And I was like, that's not going to work for me. Like this can't possibly be what is expected of me in this work. And it's not spoiler. Um, so what I needed was compassion, and I needed Chris. And so our friendships and talking, um, and being committed to each other as soulmates in a lot of ways is what has fueled me to keep going when times get rough. I call Chris, not just about race stuff, but about life in general. So relationships are key to me around this, and really prioritizing those relationships, even in the midst of differences when they come up. Like I'm committed to this relationship, even if we hit a rough patch, even if there's something difficult that comes along. The most important thing is that our relationship survives and that we both thrive and flourish. And so with close relationships, I think that's important. I think that is a big part of the foundation for how we practice anti-racism and how we teach it. Um, yeah, I'll stop there. That's good enough.
So just to recap, I hear the importance of nurturing through relationship, not only for you two as friends, but Christopher, you specifically mentioned your church community in Compton and how much you experienced nurturing and for you and your wife and just the whole community there. So that's a key part. And then I also hear another key part being the compassion practice. Is that, yeah. So would either of you like to tell us a little bit more? Because the three of us know what you mean by the compassion practice,
Right.
but I'm sure there's a lot of
Yeah.
listeners do not. So,
So yeah, the compassion practice was developed by Frank Rogers, Andy Dreitzer, and Mark Yaconelli, he's kind of the silent partner. I've actually never met him. I've only heard great things about him, and from what I've heard, I'm sad that I haven't met him. Um, so,
yeah.
but Andy and Frank were on my dissertation committee, and
Mine too.
and yeah. So, right. So the compassion practice comes out of Frank's own life experience and the trauma he encountered and whatnot. And um, I think one of the really cool stories is when Andy saw what Frank was doing, and that was sort of one of the early genesis of the compassion practice. Is he said, Frank, what are you doing? We need to like walk through this. Walk me through what you're doing. And so Andy then used his experience and everything that he knows to try and like systematize it basically,
Right.
and to understand it and to put it into a form that other people could use. Because Frank was doing it all kind of intuitively for himself at that time. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think that's a really cool part of it. So the compassion practice is basically um, a way to cultivate compassion for yourself,
Mhm.
um, that involves, it's deceptively complex, I think is the best way to put it, because compassion begins with self-compassion, and then we move out to others, and then out to the world more broadly. And the steps for cultivating compassion are actually the same for yourself as it is for others. Um, and we begin by cultivating compassion for ourselves because basically our vision is clouded if we're feeling reactive towards people. We can't see them clearly. And we've all had experiences like this. We like to explain it in terms of hulking out. So, like, the Incredible Hulk. So, when Banner is, himself, he's a scientist, and then he gets reactive and he turns into this giant green monster. And so that is, I think, a really great way to talk about kind of reactivity, which is, I think, one of the things that the compassion practice deals with really well in its early stages and grounding is how we can be taken over by um, emotions, passions, however you want to name them, reactivities, the things that take us out of ourself, where we feel like we do things that aren't who we are. And then we come back to ourselves and we say, why did I do that? That's not me. That's not who I am. And so that's the grounding aspect of compassion. And then the self-compassion is beginning to understand the multiplicity that lives within us. And that is really, I think, in the context of race, that multiplicity is vital. It's absolutely essential to understand that we are not a monolithic entity. We are a multiplicity. So parts of ourselves drive us to do things that we don't want to do. They are not the totality of who we are, right? We have that self at our core. I'm not explaining this very well. I'm explaining to people that know it. I'm sorry.
Yes, I hear IFS language.
Right. That's really important around this is to know that, like, sorry, I slipped into teaching and not explaining the basics. But the reason that's important in the context of race, for me as a white person, in a monolithic view, I'm either racist or I'm not racist. There's no room for any other way for me to be. Within a multiplicity view, there are parts of me that are racist or act out racistly, but that's not the totality of who I am. And
Mhm.
so that gives me space to begin to see myself as more than racist, as more than just perpetuating whiteness, and to see those parts of myself and to understand what they're yearning for. Because that's the second part that's important is that at the core of all these different parts of ourselves within this multiplicity, they're all trying to help us in some way. They may not know how to do it well or cause us to act out in ways that look like anything but help, but they're all doing the best they can to try and help us in the best way they know how to do. And so taking time to understand that really transforms our relationship to ourselves. And um, in the context of anti-racism, helps us see people as more than racist or not racist.
No, I think that I mean the only thing I would add that with respect to the compassion practice is what where I think it's critical for the work that we do is that it if it moves you to not dehumanize
Yeah.
the other. And I think that's so critical. I think it's easy to slip into a language and logics of dehumanization without even knowing it, right? The way our systems are set up with these false binaries with respect to racial hierarchy, or I would say the human animal binary, like all these different kinds of um, ways of viewing each other that are ultimately, I would argue, products of capitalism that are designed to make us see ourselves as commodities. And what the compassion practice does, it opens you up to see the other person for the totality of who they are, right? By recognizing their wounds are just the same as your wounds, right?
Mhm.
It creates some distance, gives you some distance from their reactivity so that you can see them as a human being rather than or I guess as what, Seth and I would always use the one of the sayings of Jesus, to tend to the log in your own eye, not the speck in their
Hmm.
eye, right? Like to do
Right.
some inner work first before you start being reactive. And it's not to say that other person hasn't done something or said something racist or acted racistly, but it's to recognize that's not the totality of who they are. To see them through a compassionate lens and to invite them to their better selves, I think that is so critical, right? Um, because we live in I mean, that's not the language you hear right now within our political system. It's not the language you hear right now I mean, I am in the midst in Los Angeles of a precipitous rise of violence towards immigrants, right?
Mhm.
And that's not the language that I hear and I see with the some of the members of my community um, who work in the law enforcement. And they are going through what Seth described earlier, a kind of moral injury because it is being rewarded. What is dehumanization is being rewarded right now in ways that hasn't been, and
Hmm.
it's causing people it's causing harm. It's really causing harm, and so this is how we resist, right? Like this is how you dismantle these. I I'm just gonna be honest. How you dismantle these fascist systems is when you are in solidarity with each other and you don't see the other as an enemy, rather you see them as a fellow human being. I don't know if any of you, maybe some of your listeners are familiar with, like the police force in Milan. They were rather than standing up and resisting a protest that had arisen or that's been rising against the government there and some economic injustice happening there. The police marched with the protesters in solidarity with them. There was no
Mhm.
conflict. They're like, no, I see you. I agree with you. I'm here to make sure that there's no violence, but I don't need to carry a baton or the shield or anything. I'll just march right with you. That is power, right? And that's what I mean when I'm talking about the compassion and spiritual connectedness is we're able to see our common you're able to break through the veil that makes us believe that we are different from each other.
Mhm.
And I think that's what like I mean I have all these books for those of you watching on YouTube and like Howard Thurman for me is like it's my like he is the guiding sage of showing people the importance of hearing each other's sign of the genuine so that we can work through racial and religious difference to resist empire. Like I'm teaching a class on Thurman right now, and I'm telling you what he was writing in 1920s and 30s. You read it, and you think he's talking about 2024 America because he was writing against the rise of fascism, right? He's writing during
Hmm.
beginning of World War II, and it's the same thing. And it's like we're reading using the Disinherited in my church right now because of it, because it's just as relevant now as it was when he wrote it in the 1940s. And so yeah, I'm sorry, I know I get preachy, but but for me, I know when I've seen it come alive. Like I've seen it come alive in these movements, and so I know it's how we can win. And we are in a moment where I pray I pray we win. We can't let those who believe themselves to be like God win, because that's fundamentally what I think they believe themselves to be like.
Mm, mm,
So I think, Chris, what's interesting about what you're saying is I think I'm thinking of all the mystics across traditions that I've encountered are the antidote to this moment. Their
mm.
wisdom is the resistance we need to enact, is that unitive experience, as Gerald May might put it, um, that we have with however we understand the divine, is also what helps us see other people as not distinct and separate from us.
Yeah.
And and that knowledge, that wisdom is the resistance to this moment. Learning that, like, 'cause it's not a head thing. Like getting that intellectually is not difficult, right? That's pretty easy to get. Understanding it takes practice, takes effort, right?
Now, I always tell, the people in my church community, we have this sign up at my church that says we must learn to love our enemies or we can become what we hate.
Mhm.
Like that's it. Like, you have to learn to love them or you can be, or you begin to perpetuate the violence that you believe you're trying to dismantle. And we know, and we believe in the myth of redemptive violence. Like, violence is not redemptive. Violence just begets more violence. The only way through this is peace. And for us, you know, compassion is basically how we would define peace.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I hear, thank you, Seth, for espousing the value of that unitive love and that unitive vision of whether you call it like in Buddhism, I think the term would be interbeing, and
Mhm.
other paths,
Yeah.
it's interconnectedness. In Sufism, it's the unity.
Mhm.
It's that we're all from, the idea is that we're all from one soul, that we're all brothers and sisters in humanity, and that we really aren't separate. We're really actually all parts of one being. Um, so thank you for giving voice to
Mhm.
that. That's one of the reasons that I love the mysticism of all the different paths, because it really just brings it down into the oneness. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually what Thurman calls. I was gonna say Thurman calls it oneness. Thurman's like
Oneness.
Mhm.
he's like the oneness. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
love
Habib,
that.
I have a question. This is something Chris and I have talked a little bit about. Um, in our experience, I think this is true for a lot of people that are doing this. You get glimpses of that, right? You have glimpses or shorter experiences of that oneness,
Mhm.
and it's not a resting place in which you dwell day to day. Is that true for you? Do you think it is a place you can live out of daily?
Okay, that is a big question,
Yeah, it
Seth.
really is.
I'm not really sure. Okay, I'm gonna try and answer it and truthfully and not take up 30 minutes to do so. Um, in Sufism, there is this idea of spiritual stations. So the Quran talks about the different stations of the self, and the self being the whole being. So mind, body, heart, soul,
Okay. Hmm.
intellect, the whole. Um, and so you start out with the self that is easily swayed. It doesn't have a lot of self-control, and then it basically just goes with whatever impulse there is. And then there's, one step above that is like where there's guilt. Like you start to have you might have done something, but you're like, oh, I feel bad, I shouldn't have done that. So there's this progression from like the lowest station to the highest station. And then there's also this belief in the I just the material world, but then the first unseen world being, the worlds of the
Hmm.
angels, and and then there's this progression into the world of oneness. So there's this progression from the material world that we're in through into divine actions and divine attributes to oneness. So the idea is that there are some people who do have that spiritual progression and spiritual station to live in the station, the spiritual station of the unity, and that's very rare. We're
Yeah.
talking like one or two people per like millions, or maybe even,
Mm.
I'll just say it's rare.
Rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of us tend to be in those first couple spiritual stations. Very
Yeah.
few of us get to the point to that point of actually living in the station of unity. But we are often, depending on the individual and their spiritual path or whatever, I would say that many people do have tastes of it, which is, I
Yeah.
think, what you were
Yeah.
referring to,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
we have these moments. I remember most bizarrely, there was one time where I was in the gym of all places, and I was on my way to the water fountain, and I just sort of stopped because I had this moment of seeing every human being in the gym around me as light, and light connecting from solar plexus to solar plexus to solar plexus.
Oh, yeah.
So it
Uh-huh.
was just this web of light. There was no individuation. There was just this light that's connected to this light, that's connected to this light, that's connected to this light. I mean, it was just like the whole universe of life was this web of light, you know. So for me, that was a moment that I had a taste of unity
Yeah. Yeah.
on my way to the water fountain in the gym. And then as soon as I remembered, okay, I just stopped in the middle of the gym, like with sort of no awareness of what's happening around me. And as soon as like my mind went like, you're standing still, then
It's
bam, it
over.
was
Yep.
gone, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Gone. But whether it's that kind of experience where you see something, or whether it's experience, another experience that I've had was, I can't even talk about it, but was going to the mosque in Hebron and being at the
Mm.
tomb of Abraham, peace be upon him.
Mm.
And yeah,
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it was just like, there is nothing but love,
Yeah.
a unitive love.
Hmm.
No, and when you feel that, like it it's almost hard to describe, and that's why I love when as both you and Seth are talking about, you see this divine web of connectedness or this taste or this glimpse, because I think it for me, it's like those things you're like, oh no, this is real. Like this is like the really real,
Hmm.
and I know for me, it was my ordination was the, I mean, it's happened multiple times, but my ordination was one of the moments where it was not, I wasn't expecting it to be significant. It felt very much like something I had to just get done. I was
Mhm.
like, I gotta go through this, blah 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 blah. And then that day, I stood up on stage and they called our names and like, this is the class of such and such. And I look out and I see the pastor of my childhood church, the one who inc- first named and noticed my call and encouraged me to go into ministry, who has since
Mhm.
died many years ago of pancreatic cancer. And I look out and I see him, and I see him, and I freeze. I'm just like, and they call my name, and I step forward, and I just stand there, and I just start crying, and I just can't stop crying, and it's like just kind of little tears, little tears. And then we have to go sit down, and then they call us back to come back on stage where they pray over us. And I cannot describe what it felt like to have the laying on hands and feeling like he was there, and my
Mhm.
wife was there, and the bishop was there, and you're just like, it's profound. And then afterwards, after having that experience and feeling that kind of connectedness, and one of the people who were on the executive committee for our ordination, who she works for the bishop in our conference, she found me and she was like, she was like, I just want to tell you, like, I go through this. She's like, I do this every year. I've done this for 10 years. And she was like, there was something different when we were praying for you. She's like, I don't know what it
Mm.
was. She's like, but I know something was different. And it was, because sometimes, at least for me, that was happening. And I was just like, not, it wasn't, I knew it was real, but I was having this like awareness. I was like, I'm experiencing this thing. This seems beyond me. And then I have someone affirm it. It's like, no, that is what I know I experienced was actually what I experienced. Um, yeah, it was, I think it's those glimpses, as Seth said, those tastes, those moments where you're just like, if we can just, this is what gives us, continues to sustain us, to give us energy to do what we do and to move people towards a greater sense of connectedness. Because I'm like, if people can just get those glimpses, right? Just more and more, just those little tastes,
Yeah.
like that'll solve. So, I
Mhm.
mean, it'll help us in so many ways.
And that's where I was going with this, is that there are these big moments, like you weren't expecting it, but ordination is a big time,
Yeah.
right? Being at the tomb of Abraham is a big time, right? Those are spaces where you could see things like that happening, right? They become more possible because it's sort of extraordinary. But I think these kind of unitive experiences, like you had at the gym, the
Jim.
experience you
Yep.
named, the practice there is being open to when they occur,
Yep.
because you could very easily just ignore it and go on with your life. But I think being open to when you're experiencing those moments, when they happen, I think is the practice right now. At least it's something I'm trying to do more of, but I think it's needed also right now because of the moment we're in.
And I think if I'm accurately understanding your point, is that part of working in the field of anti-racism is to carry those unitive moments in your heart so that when you're in the face of another human being, you don't automatically engage in this othering
Hmm.
that is happening in the world, that instead you engage in compassion for yourself, and then you engage in compassion for the other person first by seeing them as a whole human being with a multiplicity of realities, not just the behavior that you might find offensive or the behavior that you might
Right.
disagree with. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where the way that's in the compassion practice, the way that is put together, or the way it's said, is that were we exposed to their life experiences, we'd be making the same decisions and doing the same things. And that for me is what's really helpful. It's sort of a pithy way of getting at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation. Any parting words, any final words of wisdom, any takeaways you want to offer?
I've enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoy getting to talk about um, these kind of unitive experiences, and the kind of the deeper processes of spiritual formation and the things that go on. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Habib, I think my parting words just to encourage people to, as best as you can, find community, find yourself in places where you can continue to remain connected to people who are different from you, but who also remind you of, or help you remember that they are too a part of the sacred. And I think that is how we can continue this project of being pulled towards love. And that's, I think, more than anything, is what Seth and I have learned, is the power and importance of relationship and community. It's like
Thank you.
friendship as spiritual practice. I'll just say that friendship as spiritual
Yeah.
practice.
Friendship as spiritual practice. All right. Beautiful. Thank you for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go briefly, if you would please take one breath and pause for a moment and reflect on what stays with you from this conversation. That phrase of the project of being pulled toward love sticks with me. And I think that's a great question for us to go forward with is on a daily basis or even on an hourly basis, what's my part in the project of being pulled toward love? So thank you for that. May something you heard today help you reconnect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion, clarity, and courage. May you find your way home again and again, back home to yourself, back home to the divine, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, please like, share, and comment on this episode. And please follow Beyond Names. To make an appointment with me, please visit habibburger.com. Until next time, may you be light. May you consciously participate in growing your light and in the project of love. And may you share your light. Peace be with you.